What about your family? The one you grew up in? What about your family right now? You ever stop to think about it very much? My dad was the third of 9. Mom was the youngest of 13. I had a classmate who was the 6th of 16, and a classmate who was an only child. I've known families that all the children were adopted. We've known blended families. I've even known some ones who, after being around for a while, and they're calling this one mom and this one dad, that there wasn't any relation at all, but they were so close that they were family. Well, I think that it's no surprise that we take the last Sunday of the year, the last liturgical celebration, to think about the ways that we look at family, because this is really what we've been given as our way to relate to each other, our way to be who and for each other that God has called us to be. And it's interesting because the families that we have presented to us in the Scriptures today are not your way of what we would call a normal family. So first you have Abram and Sarah. So they've pretty far along in years, and Abram wasn't very happy about that. So he's praying to God. He says, you're really not helping me out very much. I don't have any kids. I don't have any heir, and there's no son to pass on the family name. And so I'm just going to give it to Eleazar, who's my servant. He's going to be my heir. And God says, no. God takes him outside. He probably was outside anyway. And he said, look at the stars. You're going to have more descendants than them. And we hear that Abram trusted that the one who made the promise would make good on it. And so in the second reading, we hear that unpacked. And so we hear that Sarah was sterile, and what a great compliment. It said, Abraham, who was as good as dead. There's a nice thing to say to somebody, And then we hear that they gave birth to Isaac. And remember then what happened later on with Isaac, huh? Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son. He didn't have to do it. But remember, he sacrificed his son. Was asked to do that. So that's one family, not exactly your garden variety family. And then, of course, we have the Holy Family. So we have a pregnancy that was pretty suspicious. We have a husband who decided, I think I'm going to get out of this, and divorce her quietly. And then he has a dream, and he says, okay, I guess I'll take this on. And then you have a son who is God, not your normal family. And so what do we take away from this? How can we make this applicable to ourselves? Well, I think there's some really significant things we can take away from that. First of all, we are created to live in community. That's just the way we're wired as human beings. God said it's not good for man to be alone. He wasn't just talking about marriage. He was talking about we are in this together. We live in a world that is increasingly estranged from each other. We have more ways to communicate than ever, and more lonely people than we've ever had in the world before. If we don't have connections, if we don't have people to hang with, if we don't have family or friends, we ain't got nothing. And we are called then to live as family. And so the first way that we do that is with our blood family, huh? And so we may have siblings or parents. But we also know that sometimes there's another group of people that we might actually be closer to than our own blood relatives. These are the people that we say, oh, you're just like family. They're kind of around all the time, They're people who we're very close to, we can depend on, they're very loyal. And so we treat them like family. Then there should be a third category as well, and that's really our church family. The church talks about, it doesn't really talk about membership, it talks about the family of God. And the family of God is also not just a place that we just kind of take up space, but it's people that share some things. And so if family is about relationship, okay, so sometimes people say, well, yeah, I'm related to so-and-so. Would you ever talk to him? Do you ever see him? No, I don't do that. Well, how can you say you're family? So we have to have some kind of a relationship. But then it's not just any kind of a relationship, because the kind of relationship that we're talking about here is one that involves belonging. It's belonging. And there is a fundamental human need for every one of us that we need to belong. People will do all kinds of outlandish things just to belong. We want to belong. And yet, our belonging is not just a bunch of meatheads who are on the same team. It takes it a step further than family, relationship, belonging. And we as Christians take that to another level. And the kind of way that we have to belong to each other, the kind of relationship we have, is one of love. And as I like to say at most of the weddings that I preach at, if you've married more than 5 minutes, you know that love is not an easy thing to do. There are some times that you know, when things... Never got a wave going to the bathroom before. So there's sometimes, that you wake up in the morning, you look at your spouse, you say, oh, God. And there's other days that you wake up and look at your spouse and say, oh, my God. It's the same person, different situation. But love is difficult, huh? And we remind ourselves, and this is really the key to family life, Jesus didn't say, like one another as I have liked you. He said, love one another as I have loved you. That's a whole different ballgame. Because it's about acceptance, it's about support, it's about forgiveness, it's about being around people with whom you feel safe, that you can be who you are, even if you're a knucklehead. Those are the qualities of what family means. That's what that belonging is about, belonging to a family, belonging to a church. It's transferable all the way across. So a couple questions I want you to just ponder for just a minute this morning is, first of all, to whom do you belong? Can you think of somebody that you know you belong to? Not just by name, but by relationship, by belonging, by love. To whom do you belong? That you know that you're accepted, loved, safe. It's okay. Equally important is the question, who belongs to you? Without them, your life would be very different. Who belongs to you? Not in a possessive way, but in a fundamental way that your life would be radically changed. And then thirdly, do you belong to God? Can you imagine the fact that God wants you to belong to Him? Not just taking up butt space in a pew, but to belong to Him, to be in relationship, to be safe with Him, to be accepted with Him. That's really what the challenge of family is about. We got a bazillion ways to define family nowadays. But the definitions pale if we don't look at what the fundamental parts are. Family is about relationship. We know people who are related who are not in relationship. They're in relationship. That relationship needs to be a relationship not just of a name or in a locale or living in the same building, but people who belong to each other. And that belonging needs to be grounded in and set upon love, which is tough, which is not an easy thing to do day in and day out. But it's what we're called to be. It's how we're called to live our lives. I want to pass on to you a quote from Mother Teresa that I saw a couple days ago, and then recently again on a sign. It says, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. Relationships are all we got. And that's a day-to-day job. And whether that's our nuclear family, our blood family, whether that's our families of people that we regard as friends, or our church family, it's all the same. If you want to change them, love them. Rules aren't going to do that in a country. Legislation's not going to do that. It's going to be the quality of our relationships with each other. For a woman who spent her entire life as a celibate, working with the poor, she got it. If you want to change the world, go home and love your families. So as we continue to pray today, we do several things. We first of all thank God for the families to which we belong. We thank God for those people in our lives that are like family to us. We thank God and maybe examine our commitment to our church family as the people of God, the family of God. And then we realize the ways in which we're called to love more. We look back at 2017 and say, okay, wasn't real loving in those situations, not very forgiving, not very committed, not very caring. And we look to the new year and say, how can I help to transform the families to which I belong? We do that by going home and loving them.